standing together on this moral agenda. Okay. Next, we believe in public policy must be examined through a constitutional and moral lens. That whenever we've had fundamental change in this country, it was because it touched people deep in their souls. It wasn't just political. It wasn't just Democrat. It wasn't just Republicans. It was something that pulled at them deep in their soul. And we must examine policy from a moral perspective, because then we can call that policy three things that gives you the upper hand in any debate. When you can say that policy is morally indefensible, constitutionally inconsistent, and economically insane. Now, Mayor Ford will tell you in political debate, what you want is to be able to force your opponent not to be able to respond to you but by cussing you out.
Yeah.
And once you raise the language, when you say you just cut 500,000 people's Medicaid, that's morally indefensible, constitutionally inconsistent, economically insane, because 2,800 people are going to die because of that decision. You're going to lose 45,000 jobs, and it doesn't match the values of doing what is best for the good of the whole.
Yeah.
How can the person that did it come back and say, it is moral to kill people? It is moral to cut that. They can't argue with you. So what they do is they call you moron.
Yeah.
Or they call you outsider. Or they say your rhetoric is too tough. And that's when you know you're on the right track, because they can't debate you on the policy. Next thing, number 4. We have to address in the South directly the fallacies of the so-called religious right.
Yes, sir.
We must say, particularly in the Bible Belt, we are no longer going to allow the political morality to be limited to abortion, homosexuality, and prayer in the school. That has to be challenged up front, and it can't be challenged by people who are not of faith best. People not of faith can challenge. But you can't put a Franklin Graham on CNN and then put an atheist, because while the atheist might have some true points, you're going to lose 50% of your audience. Yeah. You need to put an evangelical like him, or claim to be evangelical, with an evangelical like me.
Yeah.
Somebody that knows the book and can say to him, Brother Frank, you're wrestling with all of this stuff about homosexuality, and there's only 3 scriptures in the Bible about it, and most of them you misinterpret. How is it, Brother Franklin, that you dismiss the 300 scriptures in the Bible that speak to the issue of poverty and justice? So that's a different debate. And you've got to challenge it in the South, because the religious right has spent the last 56 years after King's death, 46 years after King's death, trying to ensure that never again will we have public policy that's rooted in a moral discussion when it comes to education and health care and voting rights. That's been a deliberate design.
That's right.
And you've got to take it on. And next, you have to have a movement that is rooted in hope and not fear. Right. Now, once you have, that's what the forward moral movement is. That's our lexicon. Now, what are we fighting for? You cannot build a movement starting with what you're fighting against.
That's right.
Amen.
That's fear.
That's right.
The prophetic role in the Bible was always first to give the hope of what could be, and then criticize what is. And then talk about the consequences of what would happen if you choose that way, and then come back to hope. So it's hope, criticism, and hope. So what we did in the movement, we said there ought to be 5 things we can agree on. NAACP says there ought to be 5 things we can agree on, that we ought not have to go in another meeting room and put stuff up on the board and on the sign, them little green dots. You know what we do when we're trying to decide on what we're going to, the green dot and the yellow dot, and we have a whole day meeting to decide. You know, I kind of get tired of progressives who claim to be so intelligent. Every year got to have another meeting around the agenda. I mean, at some point, we got to kind of know some agendas are as old as the scriptures. We don't have to keep right on trying to figure out. So we argue that when it comes to a transformative fusion movement at Folks on State Council, here are 5 areas that we ought to be for. fighting for? Say fighting for.
Fighting for.
First one is we ought to be fighting to secure pro-labor, anti-poverty policies that ensure economic sustainability. And we do that by fighting for some things like employment, living wages, the alleviation of disparate unemployment, a green economy, labor rights, affordable housing, and there's some other things. But that basic principle, secure pro-labor, say pro-labor,
Pro-labor.
anti-poverty,
Anti-poverty.
policies that ensure economic sustainability.
That
Ensure economic
In
sustainability.
fact, the NAACP, we call these our game changers. Number two, we ought to be able to agree on fighting for my brother. I know who that is with the hat on. Oh, Lord, that's the gospel. Just give the gospel. God bless you. Amen. The second thing we ought to be able to fight for is education equality by assuring that every child receives a high-quality, well-funded, constitutional, diverse public education. The reason I say constitutional, because if most of you will check those constitutions that were written by blacks and whites in 1868, between 1868 in the South, they all have language about education, for the most part, that's stronger than our federal constitution. Now, that language was shifted after the first Reconstruction, when white supremacists went back and tried to undo, but you need to go back to the Reconstruction Constitution and start arguing those values. Huh? What is that?
The inclusive
The inclusive Constitution. Don't read nothing. You got to go back. So, what did I say? Education equality, right?
Yes.
Access to community colleges, universities, and equitable funding for minority colleges and universities. Number three, health care for all by ensuring access to Affordable Care Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and providing environmental justice and protection. Number four, fairness in the criminal justice system by addressing the continuing inequalities in the system and providing equal protection under the law for black, brown, and poor white people. Watch the inclusive. Everything, you've got to be intentionally inclusive. Well, a moral movement is talking about how we get to the beloved community, how we elevate ourselves to care about humanity. While we have to, at times, in order to deal with issues, we have to disaggregate the number based on race, based on class, but the disaggregation of the numbers doesn't have to divide us. In fact, by disaggregating the number, we can find out that Dr. King said in his book, Chaos of Community, we're all in the same boat. Yes. All right. Now, okay, the last one is protect and expand voting rights, say voting rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, immigrant rights, and the fundamental principle of equal protection under the law that was put in the 14th Amendment to protect African Americans. And that's why we as African Americans, we can't allow that principle to go against anybody. That's right. Somebody said to me one time, I can't understand why you standing up for the LGBT community because you're black. I said, that's why. They said, well, it ain't the same thing as racism. I said, I know that. Everybody got sense know that. You ought to know the difference between 400 years of chattel slavery and 250 years of chattel slavery. 100. We understand that. But because we understand what can happen when you write somebody out of the Constitution, and we have the experience of knowing that even after 250 years of slavery, a civil war, 100 years of Jim Crow, and a civil rights movement, we still haven't gotten over the 3/5 compromise. Right. We should never allow any other segment of society to be denigrated by saying to them that your rights are not protected. Because we know we are the ones who experienced America's original sin. That's why I will stand with any community where people are trying to codify hate into our constitutional principles. You see what I'm saying? Okay, now here are the components. Here we go. We all